listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plimer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
Okay, welcome to episode number 60 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plimer, and joining me today is Leah. Nick was formerly in charge of the Brumbies Academy for a number of years and has held numerous development roles with the organisation since 2011. Outside of the Brumbies, he's had coaching roles with the Kubota Spears in Japan, the Melbourne Rebels, and University of Queensland, among others. Nick holds a Bachelor of Coaching Science for the University of Canberra and is now the General Manager of Ignite Rugby, and it's a pleasure to have him on the show. So welcome, Nick.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries at all. So Brumbies, I'm from a league background and then changed when I was in 18, so I don't have any allegiances to Aussie rugby, but if I get pushed on it, the Brumbies are the one. Mainly because of that late 90s, early 2000 team with, guys like Gregan and Larkham and Joe Roth and those amazing guys. So pretty cool to be talking to you about what you do there.
Awesome. I've actually, as I said, I'm still based at the Brumbies, but I work now for Ignite Rugby. We've got a partnership with the Brumbies, commercial partnership with the Brumbies, to run a commercial academy program essentially. So we get athletes in on a fee-for-service basis, and they train a combination of with me and with the Brumbies Academy squad.
Sweet.
And then obviously we've got the Ignite Rugby application. That's sort of something we've been working on for about 2 years now.
All right, cool. Well, we'll definitely dive into that for sure later on the show. So can't wait to hear about it and the connections with Mick, Byrne and people like that. That's awesome. So what about you? What was your backstory on playing and coaching? How'd you start rugby, and then how'd you end up getting into coaching?
My dad was a coach.
Cool.
And a reasonable coach. So I come from a small country town in New South Wales called Walker, which is sort of just south of Armidale. And we grew up as kids because it was a small town. There wasn't a great deal to do, but we had a generation of parents that were incredibly active, and from that, I guess, growing up, we pretty much played every sport there was. And thinking back, because I actually wrote a paper on it a couple of years ago about small towns, and I think in about a 20-year period, like our small town produced like an incredible amount of. There wasn't much professional sport back then, but a incredible amount of athletes or players that either went on to play for Australia or played first grade cricket or rugby or rugby league in Sydney. And as you know, back then, like that essentially was the pinnacle. There was nothing professional. We had a couple of world champion archers, world champion motorcyclists, and it was all in about a 20-year period of this town of 1,500 people produced all these athletes.
That's awesome, eh?
And it was weird, but it was funny though when you sort of go back and look at it. It was almost like a case study out of was it Goldie, the guy the ping pong player that wrote the book on it? Is it Talon
Bounce, Matthew Saeed, yeah.
It's almost a case study out of that.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's cool. I lived in Armidale for a couple of years, so I know exactly the town you're talking about, and I know exactly the environment that you're talking about, like real bush orientated. Oh, that was 19. I went to Armidale City Public School, ACPS, in 1982 to 1984.
Did you? Okay, because I went to Taz in Armidale.
Yeah, well, I lived about 5 blocks away from Taz. So,
did you?
Yeah, I know exactly. I can't remember the street name, but exactly
cool.
where you're talking about. Yeah. So you started playing rugby there, and then that led into coaching.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, sort of in the town, like, we had Dad who sort of ran all the rugby. We had a tennis coach called Betty Sweeney who actually played at Wimbledon. So we just had like a group of parents that were sort of passionate about various sports, and then so as kids, that's all we did. Like, I remember in summer we used to play cricket in the morning, and then we'd go have lunch and we'd go play in a tennis competition. We'd finish the tennis competition, we'd go and play in a squash competition.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that was in one day. So sort of, I guess we all came from we developed gross motor skill through all that. And I suppose, as kids playing around, climbing trees, all that type of stuff, you develop a love for movement. And because Dad was a rugby coach, so my earliest memories are being on the side of a rugby field, watching him coach.
That's great.
So I was sort of bred into it, to be honest, because I wasn't much of a player. So, but I always had a passion for the game. So, and I think it was probably more nature. Well, sorry, more nurture than nature there, I think. Yeah.
That's great. And what about in those early stages when you were kind of left to your own devices to coach? What were some of those early experiences like, and when you reflect on it, some of the lessons that you got out of that?
Look, I'd always wanted to coach, and at the time, rugby wasn't professional. So I left when I left school. I went to Sydney, and I sort of fell into stockbroking. Mm-hmm. Look, I started, running around the city delivering checks, and then worked my way through the back office. Then started working on the options floor, and then seats trading, etc. But I'd always had a passion for coaching, and my I'd say fledgling rugby career was cut short pretty early because I've had 4 knee operations, so I was finished at the age of 26. But at that time, rugby was sort of teetering on becoming professional, and I always wanted to coach. So I thought, at the time, I pretty much gave up a career in broking and went back to University in Canberra and studied coaching. So that's where I started. I'd had 1 year's coaching experience.
Wow.
Started doing that, but I loved it.
Yeah.
And in that year, I thought I knew everything and realised pretty quickly.
Sounds like my first year too.
And I'll look back on it, and I must, If you could only talk to yourself again, being a bit older, I probably would have been a bit different, I think. But I knew everything for a long time, let's just say. It's through experience I've had to learn that actually I don't know that much. So
No, that's great. Yeah, I had that same challenge, and it was like coming from being a player, and then I went into play as a player coach, and so trying to juggle your positional understanding, which doesn't really translate to game understanding, and then your own kind of ability to detach yourself from being a coach on the field to just a player on the field, and then managing your captain and referees, and that was there's some cringeworthy moments there for sure.
It's hard to reflect, I've got to be honest.
Yeah. But it's I found it really, like, it kind of kicked me along a bit. It made me you either seek out answers or you just keep doing the same crap. So I found it was helpful in a weird way that I was like, I can't keep doing this. So what other ways can I do it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool.
Sorry, yeah.
You go.
I think early during that period too. So I was studying, and it was weird. Like I was. The whole time I was studying, I was coaching as well, which was a massive benefit, because initially I didn't see the relevance of, and I failed them on numerous occasions, but like neuroanatomy and motor control, which is basically skill acquisition, like I failed it 3 times. But I'm lucky to have got through, to be honest. But at the time I didn't link the learning in that to coaching. But it was probably in my 4th year of university that I finally looked at it from a point of view, well, how could I use this? And then when I started to see, well, actually you can use it, that sort of changed a whole range of things for me. And look, I was lucky too. Like I sort of fell into some roles early that I probably hadn't earned. I was coaching, when I first went to Canberra, I coached at Queanbeyan, and at the time they were a struggling club, and we're struggling to get players. But I was living at ANU, the Australian National University, and all my mates were playing for ANU. So the following season, they were looking for a Colts coach, and one of my mates was on the committee. He said, "Mate, you should do this." So that falling into that position was really good. Laurie Fisher was then the head coach of the club.
That'll do.
Yeah, so that was that sort of started a pretty good grounding, and then Laurie finished with the club that year, and he was a club stalwart. Like he was captain when they won their last premiership, and he took a team really of grafters, and they were semi-finalists every year. If you ask him later, he'd say, "Look, they're never going to win the competition, but we had to find a way to get those blokes to be competitive," and that's always been what Laurie's done. He's always made teams and individuals better. So when he left that position, there was an opening for the first grade coaching position. I was only 28, and most of the first grade guys were older than me. So anyway, the club president sort of took a punt and said, because we had a pretty good year in Colts, and I ended up getting the first grade position. I was nowhere near ready, and the following year, which is probably the best thing that happened to me. Like I was coaching against Chris Hickey, who was coaching the local. That's the Waratahs. Jeff Stokes, who was involved in the first year of the Brumbies. Andy Clark, who was the Brumbies skills coach in 2000. He wasn't there that year. He was there the following year, but he was the Brumbies skills coach in 2000. Coached Royals in the local comp in 2001. So we're coaching against some guys who are really world-class coaches in a small competition. So the first 7 games we didn't even look like winning, and it was largely because of me. But I was lucky that the senior players probably backed me, I suppose, and we sort of worked out halfway through the season. We worked out a way to get better, and then by the end of the season, we were starting to beat teams that we probably shouldn't have, been competitive against teams like Tuggeranong, who Chris Hickey was coaching. I think in the last game we played Tuggeranong, and at that stage for a 3 or 4 year period, they'd never had any more than about 15 points scored against them. Wow. We scored 38 points against them.
Oh, sweet.
The only problem was they scored 60.
There we go.
It wasn't a game for defence, but from that, we'd been working on ways to attack and skills and passing, a whole range of different things, and they started to click. Yeah. The next season we made the semis with the same team, and from there, again, as a 29-year-old coach, making the semi-finals in that sort of company, I got accepted in the RU level 3, and I think at the time I was one of the youngest in the country, and again probably before my time. I probably shouldn't have been, and then I got a gig with the Brumbies. As assistant manager, just to cover for Gary Quinlivan, who's a Brumbies legend. He's been involved in the club from day dot. But the team gave him a present to go and tour the Wallabies, he and his partner. So and they needed someone to cover the off season. So for me as a young coach, sitting there, a team that had just won the Super Rugby title, and mate, basically I was just writing, like I was doing my job, but I was just writing notes the whole time. Yeah. And that was probably the best development for me. I did some rep coaching with them, and then a position opened up as the coach education manager. I went into that role, and then Laurie, who was the academy coach, he got me in doing academy sessions. He was probably the biggest influence. Like he sort of, to be honest, he didn't have to, but he sort of took an interest in me and helped me with a lot of things early. From there went into the Brumbies. Laurie moved into the assistant coach of the Brumbies. So I went into to become the academy coach. Again, there's probably better qualified people, but I was just lucky.
Yeah, cool. And what's a bit of a description of that kind of as you move through into that academy coach role, and you've only just moved into Ignite Rugby now, but as you're towards the end of your time at the Brumbies Academy, what was your role there, and what did your kind of day-to-day work look like with the athletes and outside of that?
Yeah, for sure. It's probably changed. I mean, because this is my second trip back to, or was my second trip back to the Brumbies. Right. Because I did this in 2002, so I worked there till 2004 as the academy coach.
Okay.
And the role back then was, and I'll refer back to this because I think we actually had it right back then.
Yeah.
And ironically, we've gone back to that sort of load now, and and they're getting better results. Yeah, back then it was 2 skill sessions a week, and they did S&C 4 times a week, but usually it was before the skill session, and then so it would be a Monday, Wednesday skills in the off season, and then they do S&C 4 days a week. So the other 2 days you'd be doing S&C and conditioning, speed, etc. I guess the big thing about being at the Brumbies at that time is you already mentioned, their skills were superior, and that was largely driven by Eddie. But Eddie developed then a whole range of coaches underneath him, like Mick Scrivener, who was world class, Laurie, who was world class, and they, you had a world class bunch of players, but back then there was a history of players coming to the Brumbies as unheralded and then turning into Wallabies. Because they worked individually, they looked at the player from an individual perspective and worked on what he needed to work on. I think one of the strengths back then, which has probably since become a weakness, I think, in Australian rugby, was that everything was so structured. And that was it. Eddie went
on
down.
The run.
Yeah, it was actually. Eddie went down that path because in his first year in '98 he came in as the Brumbies coach, and Eddie's always looking for a different way of doing things. That's one of his strengths. Is he's never ingrained in a certain way. He'll always search, and if you read anything on him, he's getting stuff from Pep Guardiola, or he's getting a whole range of stuff from people all around.
So at this point in the interview, Nick had to change rooms, so I got a bit of a virtual tour of the Brumbies headquarters, which led us to discussions about the previous facility they were in, and takes us a bit off track, but I thought there was some great information in there, so I kept it in the interview. So stick through it, and we get back on track.
Yeah, we moved into a plush new facility about sort of 4 years ago.
Yeah, I remember reading about it. It's near. Is it on ANU or is it?
The University of Canberra.
Oh,
actually.
Okay. Oh, that was it. Yeah. Because they were a sponsor for a bit there, right?
They were, yeah. So
okay.
it's ironic though, coming from like our old facility. It was an old bowling club.
Oh, right, really?
Yeah,
That's cool. I didn't know that. Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, so it was. But it was funny. Like I know I digress, but in the end, before we moved, because it was an old club and we owned it, we could pretty much do what we wanted with it. So
sweet.
It was probably part of the success, I think, of when Dean and Jake came in, and Dean pretty much drove everything from a high performance perspective. But there was a commercial kitchen there.
Okay. Yeah.
And the old bowlers' quarters, we turned into a sleep room. We fashioned a recovery centre out of an old tin shed.
Oh, sweet.
But we had the bowling greens right next to the gym, so you could go from the gym to the bowling green, and you could superset skill with the gym.
Right.
So as opposed to just doing a gym set or a S&C session, you might do an S&C exercise, and you're straight on the field doing a skill exercise. So you're getting that S&C into the skill, and it was such a huge advantage. But the other big advantage was it was a commercial kitchen.
Yeah.
Because we ate 2 meals a day together.
Yeah.
And that really, because that group, I think there was 10 debutants in the first game in 2012, and historically that's the best improvement of a team in Super Rugby history. The only thing was we didn't win the final in 2013. We're 15 minutes from winning it. But, we also had to travel 12,000 miles in 10 days. And,
that's right. It was South Africa and then the Crusaders, right?
Chiefs.
Chiefs, right, okay. Yeah, I remember reading that about Jake White when he was the head coach, that one of his first instincts was, oh, what have I got here? Like he was, and then he started talking about what makes Canberra so special, and it's kind of, he likened it to Green Bay and the Green Bay Packers and their success there, and that small town community and things like that. So that's really interesting what you're talking about there.
Absolutely, and he and look, just the combination of Dean, who was he was athletic performance coordinator, but he was really a high performance manager. So he understood everything and how everything fitted. You know, the 2 meals a day that we had together wasn't just about nutrition. It was about everyone getting into a room, and the whole office was largely open plan. Like, you had to walk through the coach's office to get to the team room. So there was no doors closed. There was no if someone was having a blue, everyone heard it. You know what I mean? So it had to be sorted out. If the coach was having a fight, everyone heard it. You know what I mean? So, but the other thing too is that the team room, everyone sat together. So the team bonded really well from that experience. But not only that, is that the players were on work groups. So we had a chef, but players would finish their recovery and they'd be in groups, and they would help him serve. They would then clean up the kitchen. And it was just like, from a team building perspective, like you get the Polynesian boys in the kitchen, and they've got they'd be dancing to music as they're cleaning up all the, you know what I mean?
That'd be great, yeah.
Like, it was a really fun environment to be a part of. There was no us and them, you know what I mean, which you can get in those types of environments. It was just it was a pleasure. Like, it was just a fun environment to be a part of. And even though they worked hard, and they did work hard, my God, I mean, some of the conditioning sessions that Dean put them through early on, like Sam Carter fainted twice.
Really?
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But their whole focus then was about they want to be the fittest. It was fitter, fittest, and it was all above the gym. All these slogans: fit, fitter, fittest. Return to old values. What built the Brumbies. The smartest team in Super Rugby. And every month Dean would get someone in, either from the AS or from overseas, and they present to the group on certain things, and they'd integrate. Look, it was just it was funny coming from where I was, I guess, in 2004, when I left the Brumbies. And I left the Brumbies at that time because I at the time I wanted to coach Australia, and I wanted to do it as quickly as possible. I didn't realise that I was nowhere near that. And I thought, I'm not progressing quick enough here, so I'm just going to go somewhere else, and I'm just going to do it by myself. I realised pretty quickly when I left that I might have been a bit rash, but I look back on, that's when I went to the University of Queensland, and we started a commercial rugby academy there. So I was the first director of UQ Rugby Academy, and for a long time I thought I've made the wrong decision. But in the end, I look back on it, I actually developed more probably from leaving than had I stayed, I think. Because at the time I was a good skills coach, but I knew nothing about team culture. I knew nothing about leadership. You know what I mean? I knew how to coach skills, and that was it, really.
It's part of the puzzle, but it's not everything, And all right, so staying on the Brumbies Academy for a while, like their transfer from academy athletes to professional Super Rugby athletes is right up there. What do you think? What do you put that down to? What are some of the key things that are in on that? And the other thing I wanted to add too there was where are a lot of those athletes coming from? Like, how are you identifying them? Are they locally based, or are they outside the ACT? Or and how's that kind of work? How was that working when you were involved?
It's changed a bit because the AU disbanded the academies.
That's right, about 4 years ago, eh? Yeah.
They did, yeah. And they tried to run it themselves. And the Brumbies made through Damien Hill, who's the high performance manager, and Dan McKellar, who's obviously the head coach now. They basically said, we need an academy. The AU won't, regardless of whether the AU will pay for it, we need an academy. And I'd been saying this for a while. The reason why I've been saying is because we ran a commercial academy at University of Queensland, and we made enough money to run our academy. And to be honest, that in terms of transfer, that academy's probably got the best transfer of any academy Reds, that I know of.
Yeah.
Oh no, University of Queensland, the club academy
into the Reds, right?
into the Reds and into overseas professional contracts. I think there was, of the 39 players we scholarship during that period, I think it was over 40% went on to professional contracts.
Wow.
And that's in the club academy. So they're the guys that at the
huge.
time that had missed out on getting into Reds Academy and that type of stuff. They were guys that were on the fringe of that. Our job was to get them into those programs, but then they then on progressed over the top of guys that probably initially selected ahead of them. And I think part of that is because we had an individual focus on the players, which essentially is what we got from the Brumbies. Also, as part of that, or what I learned at the Brumbies, I suppose, also a part of that was there was strong motivation in that group because even though they didn't get opportunity with the provincial, they were hungry. They were all they needed was similar type of intervention, and they were hungry enough to keep going with it as opposed to just being handed something. So there's a bit of work ethic in there. You know what I mean? You work and earn as opposed to being handed something. I think that was a definite part of it. The other side of it was UQ Rugby Academy was a joint venture between the UQ Rugby Club, UQ Sport, which ran all the sports facilities, and the Human Movement School.
Right.
So we were lucky enough during that period to have access to a guy called Cliff Mallett, who runs all the postgraduate coach education programs at the University of Queensland, has for years, and the AIS used to send all their coaches through that program.
Right.
But Cliff himself was an exceptional athletics coach. He was the coach of the relays. You know, in 2004 when the 4x4 got a silver medal.
Oh, okay, right, yeah.
It was the first relay medal, men's relay medal in 50 years or something. And you know as well as I do, Australians aren't that athletic. Well, not that fast. Like when you compare them to your African Americans, we're not even close. So, but he had to get everything right, and he's written papers on it, etc., and what they did. But it was all about motivation and self-determined motivation. So making sure that, because athletics, it's an individual sport, so you're dealing with egos. You're not dealing with egos with the athlete. You're dealing with egos of the coaches and the support staff, who all, because if I've got one athlete, I generally will hate the coach of the next athlete. You know what I mean? So. So what he did was he involved everyone in that process, worked out what motivated them individually, both the coaches and the athletes, and then brought them into a process whereby each of them felt that they were contributing, that what they were doing was relevant to what they wanted to achieve, and that they had some autonomy, some decision making in the process. So. Cliff is a master at that, and he's they've since reported on what he's done with Paul Green, with the Cowboys and a whole range of different sports. But he's a psychologist by trade, and he's got a PE background as well. But he's all his research, I guess, is on that self-determined motivation and leadership and so the benefit of, if I digress back to what UQ Rugby Academy is, we had access to Cliff. So anyway, look, I guess I've been lucky. I've had access to world-class people. I don't know why. It's just luck. To be honest, it's not through any good management or any strategic planning. It's just been luck. But when we established the UQ Rugby Academy program, one of the first things we did, and I'd already read a book called Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman, who's based out of University of Pennsylvania. Okay. But Seligman's programs are used by the US military. Now, this time they weren't, but I remember reading his book, and I remember talking to Cliff about it, and he said, you realise that we've actually done some mental toughness programs based on Seligman's work, and we've applied them to sport. And I said, no, I didn't know that, but would you like a group of athletes to do some study on? And he said, yes, I actually would. So, so the first thing we did was we tested the players, and what came back was striking. Cliff came back and he said, okay, I'm now going to insist we actually do something. He said, because most of the players you've tested, and you wouldn't know, and there's only 12 of them, but he said all but one, if things go a certain way, could suffer from depression very quickly.
Oh, wow.
And that for me was a massive eye opener. And then so Cliff, we had a workbook and he went through the whole process with it. And I come back on. There's at least one player in that group that went on to play for the Wallabies that would not have played for the Wallabies had it not been for Cliff's intervention.
Wow, isn't that incredible?
So I think that. So it wasn't just the fact we were looking at their skills and trying to develop a really good skills program. That mental toughness program, I think, really drove a lot of the development that's occurred in those players since.
Yeah, wow. Oh, that's incredible. And I think what jumps out there for me is, like you mentioned, how individualized it is. I dug up, so I've seen it before, but I dug just before we have a chat, I've dug up some of your stuff that you do on YouTube. And I'll put one of them on my website so listeners can have a look. But where you kind of track an athlete through their season and highlight areas they need to work on and what you do in terms of strength and conditioning, and then you have some really cool little clips of their games and how they're progressing and things like that. How do you start with an athlete like that when you first come in touch with an athlete? How do you kind of assess them, and then what might be some kind of nuggets that club coaches could take out of that don't have the kind of the time to do that, but want to improve individual athletes, not just the team as well.
For sure. Look, the big thing, and it's probably one thing I have left out, is that the last year of the Brumbies Academy program, we did try and measure everything. So we did develop a skills test for the players. Mm-hmm. And part of that was about, we need to show them where they are, but also more importantly, we need to be able to show them where they're getting to. And the whole premise behind that was, if one player, and I'll just use the catch pass as a simple example, is that if a player's issue with catch pass is down to the catch, well, rather than just doing activities which just focus on the full pass, well, we need to address the catch first and then put them into those activities. So that was the premise behind it, and probably the other aspect that I think drove probably UQ Rugby Academy. And even those two Brumbies Academy squads, over 25% of those players went on to professional rugby as well. Mm-hmm. But those squads were only picked from the Canberra region.
Right, yeah.
Which at the time was 200,000 people.
Yeah.
So I think. So there's a couple of things. The Brumbies' influence in terms of skills during that period, and then we started looking at how we could measure skill, and then because we always gave them what they're doing in the gym, and we can beep test, but we never gave them anything on skill. So the beauty about UQ Rugby Academy was we could then integrate all that. So first thing we did was we tested them on everything. We tested them on all their S&C, athletic performance. We tested them on their skills, and then. But then we started with the psych stuff. So we do a pre-test and a post-test. So going on from that can be a laboured process. Mm-hmm. And I'll say this: for years, I guess people would say, "Oh, mate, you don't, mate, the skills on the field." Yeah, well, it is on the field, but we can influence what happens on the field. Like, does a player have all options open to him? Mm. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I've got from Mick. But it wasn't until 2015 when I first met Mick, because I found someone else that actually did skills tests. Mm. And I'm thinking, well, I've been lambasted for this for 10 years. And he said, well, don't worry, I've been lambasted for it as well. Yeah. But I think if we go back to motivation, people want to know where they are. Mm-hmm. And they want to know whether if I'll just go back to self-determined motivation. But the three things. One is autonomy. They want some control over what they're doing. They want to know what they're doing is related to what they want to achieve. And they need to have they need to know whether they're competent. Now, competent, you've got to measure to get competence. Yeah. Because otherwise, the only measure they're going to have is whether they're winning or losing. Now, if again, there's really good research on this in terms of another theory, which is achievement goal theory, is that you've got two orientations in terms of people. One is you've got an ego orientation, and that's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. All that means is that you measure yourself based on whether you win or lose. Or you've got a task mastery orientation, and you measure on yourself on how you're going with the task. Now, there's plenty of research that suggests, through growth, through Carol Dweck and a whole range of things. It's all streams on the same theme, I guess. But if you can get people to focus and get their satisfaction out of the task mastery, getting better at the task, mm-hmm. then they take risks. Because everything's not about win or lose. When you start focusing on win or loss, that you may have 99 wins. That one loss will derail them. Mm. But if you get them to be able to focus on the task and not attribute, be able to not attribute an ego response to the result of that task, mm-hmm. then you're going to get a player, an athlete that is able to keep moving forward. But also it helps them in terms of their life, in terms of not catastrophizing when the one thing goes wrong. Yeah. So that's a lot of the Seligman stuff as well. But probably the best athlete or the best case, I guess, to think about that is Andre Agassi. Because if you look at Agassi, the early part of his career, he was images everything. Mm. That was his slogan, images everything in it. He used to say, well, I don't need game plans, and I'm just using, I just go out in emotion. But he used to tank matches, and for a long period there, he made a lot of Grand Slam finals that he lost. Mm. And then, he one period there, he got an injury to his wrist. I think he had wrist surgery, and he dropped to over 100 in the world. Then he came back and won the US Open because he wasn't expected to. Yeah. Then he won the Australian Open. I think lost in the final of the French, lost in the semi-final of Wimbledon, then went to the US hardcourt and won everything, except the only hardcourt loss he had that year was the final of the US Open against Pete Sampras. Yeah, right. And he kept going back to that match. So his career suddenly started to derail. Mm. He said, why would I win all those games but lose the one that mattered? So it didn't matter that he won all those games, but that one loss derailed his whole career. And that's when, if you go through his book, he dropped back to over 137 in the world. I think he even had a bit of experiment with crack there for a bit as well.
Something there, yeah.
That's it. But what happened next is probably, or for me is liberating, I think, is that his coach, Brad Gilbert, who was the total opposite to Andre. He was, Brad Gilbert wrote a book called Winning Ugly. Mm. And he gave Andre a bit more pragmatism, being able to read a game and adjust the way you play as opposed to just playing the same way. Mm. But what he also said, and his strength coach during that period, he sat him down and said, well, mate, you got to work out, because well publicised that he hated tennis, but Gilbert and his strength coach sat him down and said, you've got to work out essentially what you love about this game. He said, because if you don't, he said, it's hard watching you go from number one in the world to 137. He said, we've got better things to do with our time. Yeah. And it was almost like doing a business case for himself. And this is, I guess, where individual planning comes from. He went through, it wasn't the game so much. He loved the show. He was from Las Vegas. It was the show, the whole show. So then what he did, and again, his value set was about, he identified what his values were, essentially, which is that whatever happened, if a player was going to beat him, they had to earn it. Mm. So all he had to do then was just bring that to the table. Mm-hmm. So that then suddenly took the focus off winning or losing. It was, if I bring this to the table, I can win or I can lose. But I can walk away knowing, well, he beat me on the day, but I've got to make him earn it. And he said that in an interview in '95 when he beat Pete Sampras, and I'll come to that in a second. But what he did was then he didn't bank on getting wild cards at tournaments. He went back onto the satellite tour where you have to pick up your own balls.
Yeah, right.
So he worked his way back from there, and he became the fittest player in tennis. And the whole thing was, his record of winning 5-set matches during that period is unprecedented. But as the game would get tougher, he used to run from the end of the court to the seat, and then he'd run from the seat to the end of the court. And that was essentially to show that the other player that, mate, I'm willing to go as far as this goes, mate. I've got more in me. So it was the whole process, and for me, it was revealed in the interview he did with Bruce McAvaney, who's obviously a famous journalist in Australia. He played Pete Sampras in the semi-final of the Australian Open, and Sampras was smashing up 2 sets to love. And Agassi was playing unbelievably. He was just Sampras would serve, he'd return, love 15. He'd do another massive serve, love 30. Then Sampras would ace him out, win the game. And it just kept happening. And then, the 3rd set he won in a tie-break. The 4th set I think he won in a tie-break. And the 5th set he just ran over the top of him. And McAvaney interviewed him after. He said, mate, you must have been getting disheartened. He said, you were playing incredibly. You love it. He said, I've never seen a game where you got to so many times love 30, love 40, and he'd ace you out. He said, no. He said, I wasn't. He said, I knew I was chipping away. He said, the thing was, the more times I can get Pete to that, the more times I'm making. He said, he's only got so many Eddie serves in him. He said, the more times I make him do that, I know that I'm putting myself in the best position at the end of the game. He said, I've just got to keep putting him in those positions. So the whole change there from the ego of, I'm losing the game, and that just taking over the whole mental space, which then puts you on a direction which is going to lose you the game, is that his whole focus was on, I know that if I'm doing this, I'm chipping away, which for me was quite liberating. And essentially that's where a lot of the individualised stuff, particularly from the mental side of things, has come from, is that if we can get players to understand what their values are, okay, and understand that if you live your values, and you can always go back and say, well, it doesn't matter what happened, this is who I am, you know what I mean? And if you can do that, then that's your main focus, whether it's in sport or in life, then essentially, I wouldn't say life becomes easy, but you're in a better position to handle some of the obstructions that come your way.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it just shows there's so much to learn from other sports. Whether it's reading coach autobiographies or other athletes' autobiographies, I think, kind of takes me to some of John Wooden's books as well, and some of the stuff from the NFL and some of the coaches there. So, that's great. Awesome. So,
actually, can I just add one more thing? To the last,
of course. Yeah.
Because I know, so it's been long-winded, but I know the initial question was what we do on a daily basis.
Yeah.
I initially started that. I think where training went wrong in Australia is that we decided that more was better. But more of the wrong stuff is not better. It actually just burns people out.
Yeah, yeah.
So, academies went where we were in the Brumbies Academy, where it was 4 sessions a week, but that's all it was. And at UQ, it was just 4 sessions a week.
Yeah.
When academies suddenly went to full-time or almost full-time, where they're doing 6-7 sessions a week, and they're doing training with the main squad, and because structured play was so successful when Eddie started it, he started because he wanted an edge, and at that time, rugby league was based on if you can hold on to the ball for 3 phases and you can put yourself in a position where your best attackers were against the worst defenders, you'd win.
Yeah.
And it became so successful that what happened was we stopped working on skills because the pattern became more important, if that makes sense. So
totally.
What happened after that is that academy training went away from being development programs to just, our B team's got a game this weekend, we've just got to do the pattern. So we went away from the skills altogether, but we just trained more pattern. The problem is that when you just focus on that, you go back to that it's winning the game mentality, but also as players turn off, they switch off.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And also they can't adapt to when the defence
Absolutely.
doesn't give them the option to run that pattern.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I think that's interesting when you look at the history of Australian rugby. In the past decade, there's some parallels there. One would suggest.
And that's essentially why the RU canned the academies, because they weren't seeing transfer. So they wanted to run it themselves, but that created a political storm, obviously. But again, we've just come out of a period where we ran an under-20s competition, like a Super Rugby under-20s competition.
Yeah.
But again, it was about winning the competition. So what do you think they did for five, 6 sessions a week?
Structured play and patterns.
Structured play. And again, the players were terrible.
Yeah.
So what what the Brumbies have gone back to is just Monday, Wednesday skills, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday S&C, but the Tuesday and Thursday sessions can be done at their clubs, which is where they do their skills. So what they've done is they've focused. Well, what we need to do is focus on what the individuals need, and we need to go back to just focusing on skills and getting that into the open environment, and then linking the S&C. And it is incredibly important, particularly with passing, is you've got to be able to run a certain way to pass properly, And so they're doing probably 50% less sessions, and they're getting better transfer. So probably I know we went back to the club coaches. More is not better. It's actually just if you can get some good quality skill development and which changes habits into your programs. It's hard to assess players in terms of skill. You can actually do it in our app, which is simple. But I'd argue if your first session of the year is do a skills assessment. If you've got S&C, do it as well. If you don't have to. Just do a beep test or something like that. But if you test them one session every 4 to 5 weeks, and you can give the players some, at least, even if you're not giving them individual feedback on a weekly basis on their games, which is it's hard for a lot of coaches to do that. But if you can give them at least something once every 3 to 4 weeks on something that they can improve, you'll get improvement quickly. You don't need to do massive training sessions.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, and really, really interesting. And I could talk for ages on this stuff. So we'll move to your role with Ignite Rugby now. You're now involved full time with as the manager of Ignite Rugby. It's a partnership with the Brumbies, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show. What's a little bit of information about that, and how's it linked up with Mick Byrne, and when's it all kind of roll out and happen?
For sure. So Mick's obviously the director, and he's the founder, and Rod Kafer is also the CEO.
Yeah.
And our partners, we've got a 50%. Our 50% partners are a technology company out of the States called Global Aptitude.
Okay.
The whole, I guess the whole inception occurred about 2 years ago. So I put a business plan together for the Brumbies about commercial. We'd been running a commercial academy, but I wanted to take it a bit further in relation to, I believe we could actually re-establish our academy program again by putting more resource into our commercial academy, because obviously that gives us income that we can employ coaches with, essentially. At the time that I think it's well reported that the Brumbies had a few CEO issues there for a while, and there's issues with the major sponsor as well, and during that period I met Mick and Kafer, and Mick was just weighing up whether he was going to stay with the All Blacks or whether he was going to go and work with Rod in his sports tech academies business, and he made a decision to been with the All Blacks for 11 years and made a decision based on family more so than anything to relocate back to Australia and to be closer to his daughter and his son and his grandson, and he was able to do that through Rod. I actually wanted Rod's academy model in at the Brumbies because I saw a model that worked holistically on the players and looked at some of the stuff that we looked at previously and I knew was successful, and I thought, well, that's a really good model for what we should be doing at the Brumbies. So I went up and I met with them, and that was the first time I met Mick. And when I met Mick, I just thought, mate, sometimes in your life where someone changes you fundamentally. You look what they're doing. And Mick, for me, coming back to the Brumbies in 2011 and seeing Dean Benton did, and that was a turning point. What Laurie helped me with in the early days was a turning point. What Cliff did was a turning point. But then I met with Mick, and that was another turning point. And he just went through some stuff on passing, and I'm sitting there going, "My God, I've been teaching this wrong for 10 years."
Brilliant.
and I'm thinking, okay, well, anyway, it ended up being we sort of, the three of us had sat down, and I'd been, when I was at UQ, we'd always been trying to work on, we had Excel spreadsheets here, there, everywhere. We had, we had different systems, analysis systems. Like it was just hard to manage everything because you've got so many different pieces of information in so many different places, and there was so much admin work involved in collating all that information, and we all sort of, through talking, thought, well, we need something in rugby that just gives us everything in one place. So then Mick had Global Aptitude with their signature product game plan that was developed in conjunction with the All Blacks. So he said, well, these guys are really good guys, and this is similar. Like, it's not totally what we want, but it's similar to what we want. And we spoke with them, and then basically they said, yep, we're on board. Let's do it. And we're looking at, basically it was a one-stop shop, as to a place where you could store an athlete's history. So if an athlete started as a 6-year-old, this I guess is the vision, that if he, as a 29-year-old, when he finished his career, he could go back and track his whole career. So whatever he did in the gym, whatever he did on the field, his improvement, we wanted a place where he could go back and just track everything. And thereby, talent ID experts, academy managers can be more specific about how they manage their players. And being able to integrate what they need at that time, as opposed to just generic drills, I suppose. You know what I mean? And so through that process we went through, and then we sort of realised how that we got ourselves into something pretty big, because it's taken 2 years to get where we are now. Essentially that's what we wanted to do. We just wanted to develop a one-stop shop where any player and coach in the world could have access to the best information. That was specific.
So it's Ignite Rugby is it's a platform, but also there's a private academy branch to it as well that generates revenue for various reasons. Yeah,
that's it. So that's the other side. Is that the platform enables the ability to scale. So we obviously run. Our partnership with the Brumbies is the commercial academy here, but the ability to have a platform which reduces your admin load by 50%, which allows me to be more specific. Like, I can provide feedback to a player directly through the platform. It's got WhatsApp function, so all the communication can be done through the planning, can be done through it. The whole S&C program can be delivered through the platform and updated as they do stuff. They've got you can skills test in there, and then from that skills testing, it will send the player individual activities, priming activities that they can do before training. Wow. So, look, essentially it was developed so to allow most coaches coach because they love the tactical side of the game. Yeah. But often the players don't have the technical ability or the skill ability to deliver that tactics. Yeah. If we can provide coaches and players with a way that they can do that themselves, and they can refer back to a single resource, it allows parents, when they're taking the kids out to kick, yes, to muck around, but also say, why don't you, when you kick, if I put my hand here, try and kick without touching my hand. Just stop them throwing the ball up. You know what I mean? Those types of things. So suddenly we can put constraints in place that naturally develop skill.
Yeah, cool. It sounds fascinating, and it's exciting that it's rolling out. Is there any date yet for it to be launched?
Oh, look, it's live.
Okay.
Yeah, we're still doing some work in the background, obviously. So it's ready to go now. we're sort of working individually with coaches at the moment just to make sure it's specific for their needs. But there will be there will be a product for example, like, mum or dad, kid wants to play rugby. Mum or dad's never had any experience in rugby, or they may have played 20 years ago but don't know how to coach it. Well, they can just put in the start date of this training season, how many times they train a week, how long they train for, the end date, and it will spit out a program for them that they can just follow if they want. But your more elite coach can customise.
Oh, wow, that's cool. So if people want more information about it, where would they go to search it out?
At the moment, my email, nicholas@yahoo.com, is probably the best way. We're in the process of building websites at the moment. We just, as I said, I'll just mention briefly, we are in the process of trying to organise a deal with a reasonable sized organisation. That's been our main. If we get that over the line, then if we get that over the line, then that our focus then becomes on making sure that the platform's available for any individual that wants it. Whether they're a young kid that wants a few activities he can do by himself with his mum or dad, whether it's a coach who wants to run his whole program by, or whether it's an academy coach that wants to individualise, that they've got a platform that can essentially be delivered straight to that.
Yeah, right. Awesome. It's exciting stuff. All right, well, we always end the show with the same final 4 questions. When you were a kid growing up in beautiful Walker, who were some of the rugby players that you looked up to and thought, wow, they're amazing and I want to play the game?
There's only one, Mark Ella.
Yeah. Oh, when you wrote that down, when I saw you wrote that down, I was like, oh yeah, I was just crossing over then. I was probably missed that kind of glory stage, but just looking back at some of the videos there, and I think you wrote that he was like before his time, and incredible.
Not many people realise this, but Eddie Jones grew up with him.
Oh, right, really?
Yeah, they went to school from age 6. They played cricket together. They played, but they played on rugby on the road together for as kids. Yeah. So he grew up with the Ella brothers. So a lot of his philosophies come back from that time as well. Oh. So. But Mark was ahead of his time. Look, and I was lucky enough to, when I was a kid, I said Dad was a coach, but Dad got him up to do the presentation at Walker, like the seniors and the junior presentation. Awesome. I think I was 11, and so he stayed at our house.
Oh, wow.
And, mate, it was amazing. Like, seriously, it was, you know what I mean? Like, it was, but the thing was, he was such a genuine bloke as well. It was, when Dad first asked him, he was doing it on behalf of the senior club, and then he said, I want you to do the juniors on the Sunday, and he said, mate, if you didn't say juniors, I wasn't going to do it.
Oh, awesome. What a guy. What a legend.
All he did for the whole day was play with us, with the kids.
Awesome. Yeah.
Just play footy with us. It was incredible. Like, it was just amazing. Yeah.
Epic. Awesome. All right, and what about now? Who are some of the players that you like seeing out in the field?
Yeah, look, probably for me, I know I wrote. It was a bit long-winded when I wrote back, but look, David Pocock.
For sure.
And look, the thing about Poey for me is that you see his value set on the field, and he's the same off the field. You know what I mean? Like he's got some pretty strong things that he believes in, and he stands up for that. He's got the courage to swim against the tide. Another one is Christian, Leah Lafano.
Yeah.
Who I've got to know quite well, and particularly in 2012, I did a bit of individualised coaching with Christian, more on his tackling technique. Because it's funny because during the first ARC, the Melbourne Rebels, we beat the Canberra Vikings, who were basically the Brumbies. We beat them twice, and we weren't expected to. Look, it was 66-1, I think, to win, but we beat them by targeting Christian because of his tackling. So when I came on board in late 2011, I was the ACT 15 coach, which was essentially the B side and the best club players. We ran a clubs academy that year as well, but I was assistant manager as well. But I had a small skills role with some of the players that needed some more augmenting. And one of them was Christian with his tackling. But it's getting to know him through that period. But not only that is that he'd just come back from a shoulder reconstruction and he was tackling well in the trials. And the first game against the Force, he dislocated his shoulder. Tackled superbly, but dislocated his shoulder. By the end of the season, with a dislocated shoulder and doing an extra 10, and to be honest with you, the dislocated shoulder was probably the best thing that happened to him, his tackling, because it forced him to keep his hands tight, which protected his shoulder. So technically, the dislocation almost forced him to get in a good position. Yeah, right. But at the end of that season, with a dislocated shoulder, he finished the year as a 95% tackler.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
That's incredibly tough. Yeah. And he's a wonderful person off the field, but that for me was just the ability to take what was a weakness, turn it into a strength in fairly compromised circumstances that's a measure of the man, I think.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Yeah, I've been a fan for a while. Both of them too. Like Poey's just amazing, and what he's doing now with the new breakdown laws is just outstanding, and how he's adapted to that and still just being a presence that. Well, we're seeing it with Super Rugby. He's clearly being targeted because he's such a threat, and that shows how good of a rugby player he is and how he analyses the game.
Yeah. But it's interesting too with Poey and Christian, because we obviously bring a lot of the commercial guys from Japan, from the States, from everywhere. Guess who the first two blokes that have come up to them and introduced them?
Yeah, no doubt. That's great. Isn't that awesome?
Unbelievable.
Legends, mate. Legends.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And what about coaches? Yeah. You've had you've mentioned a bunch. Who are some of the ones that stand out for you?
Oh, look, Eddie. Yeah, people will criticise Eddie, but if you look at the guys that have developed under Eddie, there's a generation of coaches, the world class coaches that have developed under him. I mentioned this, and not many people know it, but he was a quasi coach of the Brumbies from 2012 to 2013.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, Jake was on the phone to him every day. Dean was on the phone to him every day. Yeah, we were essentially, a lot of our programming was based on what Suntory had done the year before.
Right.
Because John Pryor and Dean are in business together. They're best mates, and he's people will say he's not well, and I know he's copying at the moment, through in England. But I remember seeing an interview with him before the Six Nations, saying that this next year will be the toughest year for us. So it just seemed I wouldn't be surprised if this is all part of the plan.
No, exactly. Yeah, he never underestimate him for sure.
Particularly he's going to have them for 4 months.
Oh yeah.
Leading into the World Cup, and look, the thing is that there is a big drop off between Northern Hemisphere rugby in terms of the club rugby and the needs of Test rugby in terms of conditioning.
Yeah.
I know that I'll probably, if you've got people commenting on this, they're probably I'm going to probably get a cop it left, right, and centre. But Mark Hammett, when he was at Carter, said that the GPS results are similar to low-level club rugby in New Zealand. Now, I think it's better than that now, but there is a definite drop-off in terms of the conditioning needs of international rugby and club rugby. It's still seeing it in Australia. The biggest change in the last 12 months is the Brumbies were so far ahead in S&C. The other provinces have now caught up because the AU have said, well, mate, all your blokes are red. Yeah. So that's the if Eddie's got them with Dean Benton, Warwick Carrington
for 4 months,
for 12, or for 4 months prior to it, they're going to be well prepared.
Yeah. All right, great. And last question then: who's someone in your local area around Canberra there who's a grassroots coach who's doing some good work and deserves some recognition?
Yeah, there's a couple of really young blokes actually. The two young blokes that coached the ACT schoolboys last year.
Oh yeah, great.
Because the ACT school, they're only young kids. They're still under 30. But the ACT schools last year won the Australian championships.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. Did they beat Queensland in the final, or who was it?
Oh, they beat New South. I think they beat both Queensland one and Queensland one and New South Wales one, and then they played Queensland 2 in the final.
Yeah, right. Okay.
But they smashed everybody, and look, part of it is that a lot of those kids have been coming in here 2 days a week. doing so their skill. I wouldn't say their skills they were doing here were great then. They're better now. But their S&C, which transferred directly on field, was world class. And you know they shocked a lot of people. The schools are on now, and they've already had a loss to New South Wales, but they've already beat. 3 years ago, if we beat Victoria, we were happy. 4 years ago, you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
Whereas now, you know, they lose to New South. Well, like, yeah, they've already beaten Queensland too significantly, and then they lost to New South Wales 1 yesterday, but. You know, the goal for those schoolboys teams is to always be either 1, 2, or 3. If they come third, then they've hit that market. And you got to remember too, we picked from a region of about 300,000 people.
Yeah,
you know, New South Wales picked from 10 million, Queensland 4 million. So to those two, the young coaches that took that team, I think are exciting young coaches and good kids, really good kids.
What were their names again? Sorry.
So Dan Hawke.
Yeah.
And Ben McGee.
Okay, great, awesome. All right, well, it's been an awesome chat, and you know, like I said, the Brumbies were, if I'm pressed, they're my favourite team. So it's great to talk to someone who's had such a long involvement with them and involvement everywhere. And great to talk to you, Nick, and really wish you the best with Ignite Rugby, and I'm sure it's going to be a huge success. And happy to chat.
Awesome, thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Pleasure. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at Rugby Coaches CNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.